about the Steelers game. The Steelers, over the last couple weeks, with the back end of their schedule being piled up with divisional opponents, you have the Chiefs and the Eagles in there. I thought their first big test was against Baltimore, how they were going to handle one of the best offenses in the NFL, and their solution that day was to win via their defense, right? They have a top-tier defense, and they went out there and proved it. In a low-scoring game, they did enough on offense, and their defense held one of the best offenses in the NFL to 16 points, and they won their game through defense. Now, a couple weeks later, you face another top-tier offense in the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, another tricky divisional opponent, kind of with nothing to lose, like the Cleveland Browns. And this time around, they won in a different way. They went toe-to-toe, point for point, with one of the best offenses in the NFL in Cincinnati, in Joe Burrow, who's having an MVP caliber season. I don't care what anybody says. He can do no wrong for the Cincinnati Bengals. If you had a list of who's to blame for why the Bengals are so bad, he's not even on the list. Out of all 53 guys, that last spot would be for him, but he's not even on it because that's how far off it isn't his fault for what is going on in Cincinnati. But regardless of that, Joe Burrow did his thing. He scored 3-4 touchdowns in this game, had over 300 yards, and still Russell Wilson matched them. The offense for the Steelers matched them, and when their defense stepped up against the Ravens, now it was their offense. And I thought that spoke a lot about how, for real, I think this Steelers team really is after a win like that. Of course, despite the awful defense by the Cincinnati Bengals, I think it still doesn't take away that much credit from the Steelers. But overall, the final score was 44-38 in favor of Pittsburgh. Obviously, they rebounded from that loss to the Cleveland Browns in that blizzard, and they responded in the best way possible, right? With a 44-point outing. They hadn't scored that many points since 2018 with Ben Roethlisberger, and now they improve to 9-3 and extend their lead in the AFC North even more with the fact that the Ravens also lost to the Philadelphia Eagles. And now, on the part of Cincinnati, they lose their third consecutive game. Again, despite Joe Burrow having his fifth game this season with over 300 yards and also 3+ touchdowns all in the same game. It's the fifth time he's done that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's lost probably at least 3 of those games. I didn't check that, but I wouldn't be surprised. But basically, with a performance like that on offense, Russell Wilson matched it just as good as anybody could have by actually throwing for more yards. He threw for 414 yards and 3 touchdowns in this game. It was the second most passing yards in Russell Wilson's career. And I was not expecting that kind of performance at all from him. It was, you kind of maybe hoped that it was something like that was in there, but I just really thought this Steelers team was going to max at probably 27 points at most at any point in this season, but they completely outdid themselves in this game. Najee Harris also added 75 rushing yards and a touchdown as well. George Pickens led all receivers with 74 yards and a touchdown, but Pat Freiermuth led all receivers along with Najee Harris with 6 receptions for each of them as well. Pat Freiermuth scored a touchdown. Calvin Austin scored a touchdown as well. So really no wrongdoings from the offense from the Steelers, and even also from the Bengals, right? I mentioned Joe Burrow and how well he did. Chase Brown had 70 rushing yards and a touchdown as well. Jamar Chase, the numbers aren't crazy, like how he played the Ravens or something like that, but he had a touchdown, 86 receiving yards. T. Higgins also a touchdown and 69 receiving yards as well. So not too crazy, but pretty solid overall for the Bengals that only ended up losing this game by 6 points. And the way the game, broke down on itself, there was only 2 punts in the first half, both by Cincinnati. And then Everything else was pretty much a touchdown or a field goal. And also, Pittsburgh did strip sack Joe Burrow also in the first half. That helped create the lead, the 27-21 lead that Pittsburgh held at halftime. But in the second half, it was still obviously high scoring, other than the fact that Pittsburgh got a field goal blocked and they punted one time. Everything else still ended up in 7 points or in 3 points. But in the second half, while the Bengals kept coming, the Steelers' defense was still able to make a difference with Joe Burrow getting strip sacked and getting it returned by Peyton Wilson in one of the turnovers, and then he also threw another. He also threw an interception as well on a tipped pass. So those kind of moments helped the Steelers gain a big advantage, obviously. But even still, when it was 41-31, the Steelers added another field goal. But still, when the Bengals cut it down to 38-44, I was watching this game and I'm thinking like, it's way too close for the way the Steelers are playing. It's still way too close. I'm thinking if the Bengals get the ball back when the Steelers had it with like about 2 minutes or so to go in the game, I'm thinking the Steelers are going to lose this game if the Bengals get this ball back. And it's going to look so dumb on the part of the Steelers and their defense. But luckily for them, Justin Fields was able to go in there, convert on a third down, and that was pretty much it. That iced it. And first, the things I'll say for the Steelers, it's great for them, obviously, to score like that, obviously, especially with what they've had to deal with recently with, like Matt Canada and like the quarterbacks and everything like that, only averaging like 18 points or something for the last 2 seasons, something like that. For them to get a performance like this is super exciting, obviously. But it wasn't all great because, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase were destroying their secondary. Joey Porter Jr., geez, he had such a bad game. He had 6 penalties called on him. And it looked pretty bad when you were watching it live. But Mike Tomlin talked about it today, and he, didn't really talk about it too much other than the fact that he mentioned that he doesn't want Joey Porter Jr. to be any less aggressive. So it was definitely a moment where I'm thinking, like, this is clearly the worst game of his career. So that wasn't great, obviously. But still, they were able to get the win. Their front seven did their thing. But what I will say for the Cincinnati Bengals is you just can't explain too much how bad their defense is. And it's not just the fact that, like, they just have bad players or anything like that. I think it's how we got here from the offseason until now that I don't really like it, or it doesn't really sit well with me, because you look at this defense and they're second to last in total points allowed all year, and they have a 2-4 record when scoring 33 points or more. When you compare it to the rest of the NFL, when they score 33 points or more, they're 52-1. Only one team has lost when they've scored 33 points or more. The Bengals themselves have had 6 games of 33 points or more, just themselves, and they've lost more of those games than they've won. It's pretty insane. And then I think that the main thing with me is when people consider the Bengals contenders in the preseason and things like that, I'm looking at this Bengals team and I'm looking like their defense, their offensive line isn't that much better than like the Ravens, the Steelers, even the Browns, and people are still having the Bengals up there with the Bills, with the Chiefs, with the Texans, and all their star power. And I'm thinking like their team is not looking that great, just compared. The only thing that is going to be a huge, obviously, piece to it is that Joe Burrow is going to come back and he's going to be healthy, right? Everybody kept bringing up the fact that when Joe Burrow plays most of the games, they make it to the conference championship, right? And I think Joe Burrow is that good. I think he is in there with Josh, with Lamar. Patrick is ahead of those guys just barely, but I think he's in there with Josh and Lamar. I feel like I'm missing someone, but it doesn't matter. he's definitely in there with those guys. I think he's that good. Clearly, just with how much he carries this Bengals team, but it just can't all be the fact that it's just Joe. The fact that Joe's there and healthy, that doesn't mean that, forget everything else. Joe's our quarterback, so we're going to make the Super Bowl. That's how it came across when you hear everybody talking about it. And when you look at this team, they didn't have a solid, number 2 corner coming into this year. It was going to be either a safety that was going to play that position or one of their young corners coming in. Not only that, they didn't really add anybody outside of, just Geno Stone, but he really hasn't done too much coming into this year. They lost a guy like Joe Mixon, so despite that, their offense is still one of the best, but they really didn't change too much about this team like the Texans did. Maybe like now you look at the Bills and adding like Amari Cooper or something like that. The Bengals didn't do too much of that other than just the fact that Joe was going to be healthy. And again, I put him in the conversation with Josh and Lamar. Those teams, if you ask anybody on the Bills, they're not just going to say they win just because they have Josh Allen. It all has to be a balance, right? Josh is great. He's awesome. He can win you games, but it's also the running game. It's also their defense. It's also great coaching and things like that. It's also the playmaking that they have around him, right? Same thing with Lamar.